What's up everyone, and thank you for stopping by. Today's project is this Toro lawnmower, and the problem is that I just picked it off the curb for free. However, it's supposed to start and run, but it needs a tune-up. Now, most people wouldn't just give away a perfectly working mower, so more than likely there's got to be a reason why they gave up on it. Let's take a good look at it, find out what's wrong with it, and hopefully we can fix it. In this video, we try and repair this mower. However, it may not be the exact repair you need to make to yours. We'll explore other options later in the video. So the ad was actually giving away 2 mowers, but we'll cover the other one at a different time. Now, I do have a soft spot for Toro mowers, and that's because it was the brand I used when I was mowing lawns as a kid. But that one had a 2-cycle Suzuki engine, while this one had a dreaded Tecumseh engine on it, which I have to say really isn't that bad. It's built rather well. Now, the biggest problem I see with this engine, though, is the air filter assembly. Its design allows it to get wet, which makes it pretty much useless. I'm not sure what happened to this one, but before we try and start the engine, we'll have to remove it because with it looking like this, no air is going to get through it. Now, after looking over the mower, it's actually in really good shape. Nothing seems to be broken. The cables and levers work like they're supposed to, and I haven't seen any real good reason why they let this thing go. That is until I tried to push the mower. Now, the mower rolls backwards without any issues. However, when you try to push it forward, the front left wheel locks up. Now, I'm not sure how you feel about it, but having a wheel that locks up when you push it would be enough for me to give it away. Now that I know there's a wheel issue, I want to try and start the engine and see what else might be wrong. Luckily, there's plenty of gasoline in the tank and it smells fresh as well. Now, the cap is missing the silver bell which attaches to the underside, which helps it to vent air. With this gone, it might have a stalling issue, but we'll tackle that at a later time. Now, after checking the oil, however, it's barely on the dipstick. That means this engine might have some internal damage due to oil starvation, but we won't know that till we get the engine started. Next, I'll prime the carburetor and try starting it. So there were several things wrong during that test start. One of the problems was an engine that seemed to have a slight ignition miss, and that's why it was running rough. The second thing that was bad was when I first pulled the rope, the engine slightly yanked back on the rope. It did it again the second time, but it wasn't as bad. So we might have either a partially sheared flywheel key or the valve lash is out of tolerance. The last thing that was bad was that the self-propel wasn't driving the wheels like it should. The right wheel spun for a few seconds, but the left wheel barely moved. I hate to say it, but I think this one is going to be tough when it comes to trying to solve all these problems. The first thing I want to do is tackle why the rope yanked back out of my hand. What we need to do is remove the engine cover and then the recoil assembly so we can get to the flywheel. Now, once we get to it, we need to take it off and inspect the key. For those of you who don't want to use a hammer to remove the flywheel, I will be using a puller this time. Now, I don't plan on working on the carb, but I don't want to make a mess either, so I'll drain the gasoline out of the tank. This will also give me a chance to inspect it for any issues like water contamination or debris. If you know that it's fresh and there isn't much in the tank, you probably don't have to drain it out. Now, as gasoline ages, it starts to get a little darker in color. That means this gasoline isn't as fresh as I thought it was. However, it looks to be only a few months old, so that's not the reason why it's running rough. There is some debris in it, but it looks to be just grass clippings. Now, there is a fine mesh screen at the bottom of the tank, so it's not a real serious issue. Now, once the tank is out of the way, we can then remove the last 2 bolts so we can take off the recoil assembly. After that, we can then take off the nut holding the starter cup and the flywheel. So here's the slot for the key. However, we can't see the top of the key to see if it's slightly sheared. This is when we need to use the puller. Just put the arms of the puller under the edge of the flywheel, then turn the bolt until it touches the top of the crank. Then I'm going to use my impact to turn the bolt, which will then pull the flywheel off the crankshaft. Once the flywheel is off the crankshaft, we can now see the key. If we take it out so we can inspect it, you can see it looks like a long rectangular piece of metal, which means it's not sheared. If it was, it'd be broken into 2 smaller pieces. Now, since the key isn't sheared, then the other option would be that the valve lash is out of tolerance. To check it, we need to get to where the tappets make contact with the valves, which is behind this metal plate. To get to the plate, we need to take the carb and the intake pipe out of the way, and to get that out of the way, we need to remove the muffler. Now, this wouldn't seem so much like a puzzle if they designed the muffler so it wouldn't sit in front of the mounting bolts for the intake pipe. This is just one of the reasons why some people don't like this engine. It has the intake and the exhaust on the same side of the engine. Before we start measuring, we need to put the engine to top dead center, which is where the piston is at the top of its travel in the cylinder. For me, I like to remove the spark plug and use a screwdriver to see when the piston is at the top. This is when I notice that the spark plug is covered in carbon buildup. Now this would cause the engine to run rough, so this might be the reason for it, and we could just replace the plug, but I want to see if we can try to save it. To make it easier to turn the engine, I'll replace the flywheel on the key, then insert the screwdriver into the spark plug hole. Now carefully turn the engine and watch for the screwdriver to be the furthest away from the engine. So this is when things get a little bit confusing. The first site I looked at for the valve clearance said that it's between 4 thousandths and 8 thousandths of an inch, but on a different site it says it's much tighter at 6 thousandths to 8 thousandths. Now the reason why it doesn't matter is I'm only interested if it's out of tolerance on the larger measurement of 8 thousandths, which both sites luckily agree on. The reason is if it's larger than 8 thousandths, then it would cause the rope to pull back, and what we want to see is if the 8 thousandths feeler gauge can slide between the tappet and the top of the valve stem. If it does, then we know that the clearance is larger than 8 thousandths. If it does not, then we know that the clearance is smaller than 8 thousandths. And as you can see, the intake is smaller than 8 thousandths, which is great. Now we need to check to see if the exhaust will do the same thing. As you can see, the 8 thousandths of an inch shim did slide in, which means that the clearance is larger than it's supposed to be. Next, what I'll do is see if the 10 thousandths of an inch will slide in and see how much resistance there is. And as you can see, it did slide in, but it's a bit tight. So that means that the clearance is probably less than 10 thousandths of an inch. Next, I'll use the 9 thousandths of an inch and see how well it slides in. So the shim slid right in, and it's easier to move around than the last shim, but it's tighter than the 8 thousandths shim. What that means is that the exhaust valve lash is less than 2 thousandths of an inch out of tolerance on the larger side, which means unfortunately when pulling on the rope it's sometimes going to lightly pull back. Now to fix this problem, it's more trouble than it's worth. Now if it was several thousandths out of tolerance, the rope would pull back so hard out of your hand that it would hurt. So I think I can live with this for right now. The next thing I want to do is see how worn out this engine is by using a compression tester. Now you can find these online for about $20, and to use it, just install it in the spark plug hole and pull the rope several times. Now since the recoil is off, I'm going to use a drill to turn the engine over, and that'll bypass the compression release. Now the tester will measure how much pressure your engine can make on the compression stroke. We want to see a number well over 100 psi, and the higher the better. So the reading is 145 psi, which means that this engine is very healthy. It's not brand new, but at least we know it's not worn out. Now the blue smoke from the exhaust would show that it is burning more oil than it should be, but it could be from me shifting the mower around, causing more oil to rest up against the back of the piston than normal. When we get it running again, we'll see if it's still doing it. As for the misfire, I'm going to try and clean the spark plug using a torch to burn off the carbon, and then I'll finish it off with a wire brush. If this doesn't work, I'll then replace the spark plug with a new one. So the spark plug looks a lot better than before. There was a lot of carbon buildup around the porcelain insulator, so hopefully it should work a lot better now. I also noticed that the air gap was a lot smaller than it was supposed to be. I tried using a 20 thousandths of an inch shim and it didn't fit, which means someone must have closed up the gap to cure the misfire. I'll open it back up to where it's supposed to be and see if the misfire is better or worse. Now after replacing the spark plug, I'll then put the intake and the exhaust back onto the engine. Another reason why this engine would have a misfire would be low compression. If the compression was below, say, 75 psi, even bypassing the compression release, then this could cause a misfire. Now, low compression could be either from worn rings or a leaking valve seat. Unfortunately, to fix it would require an engine rebuild with a cylinder hone, new rings, and valve lapping. However, if there's a lot of cylinder wall damage, then we might need to sleeve the cylinder. And if that's not a possibility, then we might as well buy a new block. And if you're going to buy a new block, then you might as well buy a brand new engine. The second option, of course, would be to buy a used engine. Now, we're not going to deal with the locking wheel in this segment because that problem requires its own video. Now, I know I said I wasn't going to open the carburetor, but I needed to replace the fuel line and curiosity got the better of me. I'm glad I did look into it because what I found is there's water at the bottom of the bowl, which means that the gasoline that was in the tank also had water in it. Now while I'm here, I'll clean the bottom of the bowl along with the edge where the bowl gasket seals to it. If there's buildup on this surface along with the O-ring, this could cause an air leak and the fuel wouldn't flow into the engine like it should. This would also cause the engine to run rough like ours is doing. If this doesn't work, I'll order a new bowl gasket and hopefully that fixes the misfire issue. Now, even though I know the fuel jet is going to be clear, I'm going to clear it anyway just to make sure. I also want to make sure that the tiny hole at the top of the threads is clear as well. The reason is this hole is the smallest one and it doesn't take much to clog it. I'll have to use my micro drill bit set to make sure it's clear. Then you can buy these online or at your local hardware store. After looking at how much buildup there is on the O-ring and how much it's hardened up over time, I'm going to guess this is the reason why the engine is misfiring. Depending upon how much the O-ring is, I might just replace the carb instead because it's a lot easier to do. Also, if I do buy new bowl gaskets, it's going to be a multi-pack. That way, it'll be a better deal. Unfortunately, when I took off the intake pipe, the gasket didn't stay in one piece, so I had to clean off all the old gasket and cut a new one using a large sheet of gasket paper. Now, if you don't have this type of paper, you could use gasket maker. However, I'd probably let it cure before you put any gas in the tank or try starting it. I have heard of people using thick cardboard from a cereal box to make gaskets from, but I've never done this, so I don't have any information on it. Unfortunately, I got in a bit of a hurry and forgot to install the new fuel line on the carburetor while it was off the engine. That's okay, since the recoil is out of the way, I have plenty of room to install the new line. Now the old line wasn't as thick as the new line, but the clamps still work, and of course, I had to replace the zip tie with a real clamp. After the fuel line has been installed to the tank, we can then replace the recoil and its bolts, the fuel tank, and then the top cover. After that, we can then put oil in the engine and then some fresh 100% gas with no ethanol in the tank. I will say this, the one thing I like about Tecumseh engines is that they hold more oil than most other engines in this horsepower range. So when people neglect to put enough oil in them, they seem to have just enough oil to keep them lubricated. They also have an oil pump that will deliver oil to the top bearing, which I haven't seen in other engines this size. As a reminder, please check your oil as often as you care to, otherwise make sure you save up money for a new mower every 3 to 5 years. I've gotten comments before asking, how do I know how much oil to put in the engines I work on? And the answer is, I don't know. I just pour some oil into the engine, then I check it with the dipstick. And if it's not enough, I keep pouring more in until it's full. Even if I know that it takes 21 ounces of oil, I never measured that amount out and poured into the engine. And even if I did, I would still check it to make sure that it wasn't overfilled. And if that's how you put oil into your engines, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just not what I do. So it started on the first pull, which is great, and there was only a light puff of blue smoke when it started, but then it was gone. The engine wasn't missing as badly as it was before. In fact, it's really hard to tell in the video that it was even missing, but in person, you can still hear it. It's just really hard to notice now. I think I'll order the bowl gasket and replace the spark plug, and hopefully it'll run a lot better after that. I did try to use the self-propel again in hopes that it would work, but it seems like the problem isn't going away, but we'll have to take a look at that in the next video. So my question is, would you ever bother trying to fix a Tecumseh engine on a mower, or would you just pass it up and let the next guy pick it up instead? Personally, I don't have a problem picking them up to fix. However, I really don't care how they cut the grass, so I don't care to use them on my own lawn. I guess I could try switching to another style of blade, but I like to compare mowers with the blades they come with from the factory. Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask me any questions, and I hope to see you in the next video.